French or in English?
Good morning, everybody. Initially, I wanted to give my talk in French because I think I'm not very fluent in English. But finally, I will try to speak English for you. Human remains of La Denise, it's the name of the site, were found in 1844 near the city of Le Puy-en-Velay, located in the southeastern French Massif Central. And I will introduce to you a part of my master's degree work. These human bones are still conserved today in the Crozatier Museum in the city of Le Puy-en-Velay. And since 2010, they are not exposed to the public, but stored in the reserves. So one of my first questions was why these human remains were forgotten, whereas they attracted many scholars and curious people in the past. So to lead my investigation, I look for different kind of historical sources in different places, such as departmental archives, where I found Auguste Aymard's papers. Auguste Aymard was the major scholars of Le Puy-en-Velay in the 19th century, but also the library of the French Geological Society, where I read its bulletin. I also found letters of the same Auguste Aymard in the Natural History Museum archives in Paris, and I consulted for rare books in the library of the Institute of Human Paleontology. It exists different way of writing history. We can focus on scientific personality, we can study controversies, we can treat Ox case study, such as Piltdown, adopt an anthropological approach, considering objects' social life, for example, or write the biography of a scientific object, but also focus on notions like fake or objectivity, or participate to collective work. Here, for example, a work concerning the birth of prehistory, with the famous photograph in Aubervilliers. So my first part is the question of the demonstration of human high antiquity. And I think it's a geological problem. And here you have the first article, which concerns human remains of La Denise, published in a local newspaper. And we learn that a frontal bone was found in a volcanic layer. And moreover, rhinoceros bones were found near the place of the discovery. And here you have current photographs of the so-called fossil man deposit. So it's today. And concerning the archives, Auguste Aymard, the local geologists, archaeologists, scholars, took many notes and drew a lot. It rated many subjects like archaeology, geology, paleontology, but unfortunately, I found nothing about La Denise in his paper. So is it a gap in the archives or a real absence of notes? I don't know. Charles Lyell traveled to Le Puy-en-Velay in 1859, and he saw the human bones and dig in La Denise on the advice of Edmond Hébert. Edmond Hébert, who was a famous geologist of La Sorbonne University. And Albert Gaudry came to Le Puy in 1862 and drew a geological section of the site. And as the local geologist, he considered the layer where human remains were found as a product of a kind of muddy eruption. And from 1892 to 1987, a series of works will complete the geological knowledge of La Denise. And when Marcelin published his thesis, his PhD, in 1892, he recognized the authenticity of human remains and underlined the courage of local scholars who defended the human antiquity 48 years ago. And for him, the layer where they found the bones is a detritical formation. And Marcelin Boulle made a photographic panorama of La Denise and colored it with watercolor before the realization of a panoramic drawing by an illustrator. And in 1926, the anthropologist Lucien Maillet published an article where he described the geology of the site based on Charles Desperrets' work. And during new excavations, they exposed thin layers of sediments and concluded that they sedimented in a former crater lake, such as the actual Lac du Boucher, located in the same area. And according to them, human bones were found in the sediments of a quaternary lake, which was covered by a recent scoria cone. And after the World War II, Pierre Bou, a geologist who traveled in Iceland, reinterpreted the deposit of La Denise and considered them as periglacial formations obtained by solifluction. So for him, it is not the result of a volcanic eruption. And finally, a team of local geologists and academics resume the study of La Denise's geological context. And this mountain is the result of the expression of three volcanic dynamisms. It is a SMS volcano for Surtseyan, Mar, and Strombolian. And they observed antedune features, impact figures, and accreted lapilli, which characterize Mar volcano deposits. For my second part, I will speak about the maintain of the credibility of this discovery. From the beginning of this story, suspicion weighed on the authenticity of human remains of La Denise. In 1987, on the occasion of the publication of a work on the geology of La Denise, the recent age of the human remains, demonstrated in 1969, was called into question. And since the beginning, some people refused the idea of a fake and maintained the credibility of a discovery, whereas some other people tried to forget this episode. Above all, these bones were collectors' items, included in the tradition of curiosity cabinet, and they were exhibited during the Scientific Congress of France in 1855, which was held in Le Puy, before being integrated by Auguste Aymard into an archaeological museum based on the model of a labor history gallery of the Universal Exhibition in 1867 in Paris. And the first discovery was acquired by a lawyer named Pichot du Mazel, and the second one was acquired by the local learned society for its museum. And finally, the lawyer Pichot du Mazel, jealous of the acquisition of the museum block, bought a last batch of bones, which was very discredited by fraud suspicion. And Auguste Aymard had other pieces in his possession, and he said that Paul Gervais, a famous paleontologist, had found a tooth, and another local scholar named Félix Robert asserted that Charles Lyell found a portion of skull. But the British geologist didn't mention this portion of skull in his notebooks, and even affirmed that he didn't find nothing at La Denise. So this slide shows the different representation of the first frontal, and this second one shows the frontal which belonged to the museum block. And in 1972, Henri-Émile Sauvage published a drawing of the frontal of the layer Pichot du Mazel with a strong eyebrow. And this representation get back in further publications and played a key role in the notoriety of Ladeni's human remains, considered for some decades as the remains of a Neanderthaloid. And after this Neanderthal period, according to the anthropologist Lucien Maillet, the human bones belong to an archaic form of Homo sapiens, and he compared Ladeni's bones to Aboriginal Australians. And I want also to underline that most of the authors who wrote about Ladeni's human bones were trained doctors, and they study medicine before to be interested in those bones. And in 1954, a student of Paris University, under the direction of Professors Pifto and Valois, analyzed the hip bone, radius, and ulna of Ladenis. And the conclusion of this work, published in 1957, underlined the doubts about authenticity, but considered that if this authenticity is demonstrated, these bones testify the existence of Presapiens branch anterior to Neanderthal, according to the Presapiens theory. So if we come back to the beginning of this story, the discovery highlights a kind of social hierarchy. Thus, the winemaker probably belonged to the poor rural community, because it's a winemaker who found the human remains. And his discovery is monopolized by the local scholars who wanted to draw attention on them. And finally, they welcomed gentlemen like Charles Lyell to validate their ideas. And thus, concerning French gentlemen, if we take a look to the busts in the Comparative Anatomy Gallery in Paris, we remark that most of the associated names with these busts are invoked by the local scholars about Ladeni's discoveries. And Bertrand de Doux, a local scholar, was the first French member of the Geological Society of London, and he welcomed Lyell in 1828, but also in 1859. And during the same year, Auguste Aymard welcomed the French writer Georges Sand, and she was very interested in natural history. She visited the fossil man site and mentioned it in one of her novels. And in 1874, the painter Gustave Richon represented Ladeni's in eruption, and he depicted a typical romantic landscape with a man, rhinoceros, and a mammoth. And he also painted the Lac du Boucher with palaphytic habitats, perpetuating this myth in vogue at that time. And to spread the discovery and maintain its credibility, the local scholars used different kinds of literary technology, such as letters, papers, newspapers, bulletin, and the book of the Scientific Congress, for example. And in 1921, Marcelin Boule changed his opinion concerning Ladeni's. He didn't dismiss the idea of a fraud, whereas Charles Desperrey defended the antiquity and the authenticity of these bones. And in the archives of a Crozatier Museum, we can find the correspondence between the former conservative Roger Gounod, who worked with Nicole Heintz and Heintz Oakley to date the bones with a fluorine nitrogen dosage. And they showed that all the bones were recent, contrary to the proposition of the geologist Pierre Bouc. And to finish this part, I put here the three main texts which illustrates the importance of authority figures in this controversy. So, of course, some fraud cases have influenced some false theory. And here you can see Piltdown and Denise on an old human evolution tree. And the question for this part is, does Denise human remains are the first case of human fossil fake? And most of the time, we can have some difficulties to imagine how is it possible to make such a forgery. And so, to try to understand and realize the genesis of a human fossil fake, and in an approach close to experimental archaeology, I gathered some bones in a matrix made of plaster with mixed with a crashed volcano, a sedimentary deposit. And my researches bring me to think that all the discoveries, so with big quotation marks, are forgeries. For example, today we can separate the rocky part from the first frontal bones, and we can see on it some marks of a knife. And of course, the question is, who is guilty in this story? And strangely, in 1813, a local scientific academy exposed a controversy about the discovery of human remains near the city of Clermont-Ferrand. And the scholars already made chemical analysis to know if the bones contains organical matter or determine if the bones are fossils or not. And in the same publication, Félix Robert, a geologist from Le Puy, wrote an essay on the paleontological site of near Le Puy-en-Velay. And therefore, I can think that he knew the existence of this human bones discovery in 1830. And even more strangely, just 1 month before the first discovery at La Denise, the same man, Félix Robert, sent a paper to the Science Academy of Paris about the bones of an antediluvian man from the city of Alès. But the Science Academy and the French Scientific Congress in 1844 didn't approve his discovery. At that time, the idea of man-eye antiquity is not recognized by the scientific community. And in spite of Auguste Aymard argumentation to the French Geological Society, La Denise human remains are not recognized too. But in 1859, it is the date of a significant fossil man recognition, Charles Lyell revived Aymard discoveries, but also Boucher de Perthes discoveries in Abbeville, even if he considered that La Denise human bones are in a recent matrix generated by a remobilization of older volcanic layers, whereas he consecrated the strong proof of Boucher de Perthes, who found tools associated with fauna in situ in the stratigraphical section. However, he took a photograph of a museum block, and it traveled to the 29th meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science at Aberdeen in Scotland. And it traveled with this photograph and the famous photograph took by Prestwich and Evans in Abbeville. And people on the photograph show to us tools position in the stratigraphical section. And I think that it's probably the first photograph of human remains of the world. And another famous case of fraud is Le Moulin-Quignon in 1863, which involved Boucher de Perthes, who promised money to the quarry workers if they found human bones associated with prehistorical tools. And if we take a look to the number of references where we find the expression moulin-quignon, we can see that this controversy finished rapidly. But concerning the well-known Piltdown hoax, it's a little bit different. We observe a longest controversy. So the question is, what about La Denise? And the main problem is that with Google data, La Denise refers most of the time to the very French first name, Denise. So if we take a look to more precise expressions, such as montagne de la Denise or volcan de Denise, we have not enough data to obtain a significant curve. So I referenced all the papers linked with La Denise human remains to create this graph, which sum up rapidly the biography of this scientific object. At the beginning, La Denise human remains played a role in the controversy concerning human antiquity. These bones came back to feed the discussions on human evolution during the 30s in relation to pre-sapiens theory before becoming a subject for the history of science. And if we return to the image of the background of my first slide, we can note the presence of a white cloud in the atmosphere. It is the smoke of a lime kiln used to produce plaster, which is a good fertilizer for vine and an essential material to make a wonderful human fossil fake. And from an etymological point of view, La Denise maybe refers to Dionysos, the Greek god of wine and festivity. So it's quite funny. And to conclude briefly for the English speakers, La Denise human remains are a forgotten part of the history of prehistoric birth. And to finish, I will read this quotation in French. Les faux meurent quand le désir qui les fait exister s'éteint. Alors on réalise que ce que l'on avait admiré comme une chose merveilleuse, qui dominait la médiocrité de la réalité ordinaire, n'était en fait qu'un bricolage minable de matériaux vulgaires, simplement fait avec de la colle et de la peinture. En se dissipant, les faux redeviennent ce qu'ils n'avaient jamais cessé d'être, mais qu'on ne voyait pas, un assemblage de bouts de choses prises dans le quotidien, de pauvres débris souvent ramassés dans les poubelles. C'est la raison pour laquelle il faut malgré tout prendre soin des faux, et surtout des anciens faux, qui sont comme les vestiges d'anciennes amours mortes. Après les avoir vénérés, on les ignore, on les méprise, et on les maltraite en les entreposant sans soin dans une réserve obscure où ils sont exposés à la poussière et au coup. Il faut protéger les faux, car ce sont des objets d'art et de science. We have to preserve fakes because they are objects of arts and objects of science. Thank you for your attention. And if you have some question, I will try to answer if I can understand, of course. But I think that some people here can help me, so thank you.
Thank you, Timothé, for very interesting talk. You displayed to us a quite impressive number of sources in your research. Yeah. So, time for question. Is there any question? Maddalena?
Hello, I'm Maddalena Napolitani from the Università dell'Insubria. Thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask you something about the paintings that you show.
History of art.
Gustave Richon.
Yeah, this one or this?
Both, actually.
Both?
I wanted to ask you if you, during your researches, do you know if what was the background of these artists? Did they receive commissions from geologists, engineers? How was he inserted in a scientific milieu?
Yeah, so for Gustave Richon is a lawyer from Le Puy-en-Velay, and he knew Auguste Aymard. So Auguste Aymard spoke with the painter to do these paintings. So and Auguste Aymard studied in Paris and was linked with the Geological Society of Paris, and I think that he knew the work of Desor, the Swiss geologist. So maybe it's an explication for this kind of paintings.
Thank you. Questions? I think Pascal Lichet, Claudine.
If it is a fake, who was the culprit? And what
Who
was
was
the
the-
motivation?
The motivation. Yeah. I think that
And the culprit,
the
coupable. Qui était le coupable?
we don't know, and I think we never have the answer of this question. It's but I think that the first motor oui, of this human fossil is money, because all the blocks and all the bones were bought at with high price. So I think it's money, but comment dire? The place is not choose with hazard. So people have to know the place where they put the bones, I think. So I think that it's not just the winemaker. I think that the local scientists are involved in this fake.
Yes, just a remark and some questions. It's very interesting to point out in your curve of the occurrence of the Denise fossil, its relationship with the theory of pre-sapiens. Because the pre-sapiens theory actually was certainly alive in 1927 when George Koyré did his tree, his evolutionary tree, which includes Piltdown and La Denise, which is quite something. So the idea was to prove that there were parallel to Neanderthals in Western Europe. There were some pre-sapiens that looked like us. And this was exactly the case of Piltdown, and this was also this straw, which was recent. So that was in 1927. But then you mentioned a student of Pifto. So I didn't know the date. What was the date of this?
It's 1957.
Yes. So
and in the conclusion, it's written pre-sapiens theory.
Yes, because at that time we are in 57, and Piltdown has been dismissed in 53. And so the people who want to maintain, and there's a tradition in France of people who want absolutely to maintain the pre-sapiens theory, and prominent people like Valois, like Pifto, they are looking for other evidence for pre-sapiens. And that's why they sort of revive this old fossil and make him part of the genealogy of man, because they want to put something to compensate the loss of Piltdown as an evidence. So that's quite interesting, the chronology of things. I wondered, so I have two small questions. One is about Oakley, and because Oakley was seminal also in unmasking the Piltdown fraud. So what is his work? Did he try to do any dating? Because he had been doing some fluoride dating. What was his action about these fossils?
He dated
Denise.
the Ladenise fossils with fluor and
Yes, he made datation, and he came to a conclusion.
Yeah, all the bones of Ladenise are recent. Recent.
So
But
he
we
was-
we haven't carbon 14.
Yes.
14.
So
carbon.
he was an expert in fakes, actually, because
Yeah,
he
yeah.
also
With Moulin-Quignon,
with-
Piltdown,
yeah.
and Ladenise.
Yeah, and the third thing I wanted to ask you is about the novel by Georges Sand.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to take note of the title, but could you tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, it's Le Marquis de Villemer. Ouais. And in Le Marquis de Villemer, the main character travels in near Le Puy-en-Velay and describe this area and the volcanoes landscape of this area. And in a paragraph, she said that some local scientists found human bones in volcanic layers when she described the volcanic landscapes in his novels.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you, Claudine. Thank you, Timothée.
Thank you.
We can proceed.